Hi everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is me again, Sir Jun Michael Antone, and today's vlog we are going to talk about the enduring quests of the self. So if you are still new to my channel, don't forget to hit the like if you like this video, subscribe down there and click the bell also so that you will be updated on the upcoming videos that I'm going to upload. Please also follow my FB page, Jun Michael Antone, and follow my social media accounts. So, wag na natin patagalin pa, simulan na natin yung ating discussion on the enduring quests of the self in 3, 2, 1. Kilala mo na ba yung sarili mo? Who you really are? What you really are? Why are you here in this world? You know, one of the most difficult questions to answer in this life is the question of who am I? To answer this question, you might give your name, your physical appearance, your family background, but the truth is, you are more than just a name. You are more than just your physical looks. You are more than just your family background. There is something more in ourselves. There is something more within us that we have to dig deeper and deeper in ourselves. The quest about the self started in the ancient times. It was started by the ancient Greek philosophers, particularly Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. These Greek thinkers were the foundations of the Western Greek philosophy, especially when it comes to their doctrines on the human person. They were the first philosophers who talked about man, and of course, this relates to the idea of the self. So as of now, what is their contention about the self? Do they differ in their ideas, or do they have the same idea? The Socratic philosophers have one thing in common, and that is they began the quests of the self. So what they have in common is that they have the same idea that the self is composed of body and soul. But mind you, the soul that the Socratic philosophers are referring to is not the soul or the spirit that we believe in the religion or in Christianity as the spirit, immaterial. No, that's not the soul that the Socratic philosophers are talking about. The soul that they are referring to is actually our mind. That is why if we're going to translate it philosophically, the Socratic philosophers thought that the self is composed of body, which is the material aspect of the self, and the mind, which is the ideal aspect of the self. Now, you might wonder why I call these three philosophers are Socratic. It is basically because their thoughts about the self are actually connected to each other. This is of course related to their very own lives. Of course, we know it in history that Socrates was the teacher of Plato, and Plato was the teacher of Aristotle. So in the next episode of our video discussion, we are going to talk about their specific background in relation to their different ideas about the self. So, ngayon, what I'm going to discuss to you is only the similarity, but in the next episode, we are going to talk about the differences of the Socratic philosophers on their contentions of the self. Okay? So, the bottom line is, the Socratic philosophers somehow have similarities, but they differ in their contentions of the self, which we are going to discuss later on. However, that's not important. What is important is that they have started the quests of personhood and identity. They started the quests of answering what and who a human being is. So that is why that's the important thing there. So that was during the time of the ancient period. However, during the time of the medieval period, no, the idea of the self actually changes. Of course, this is due to the historical era that the philosophers were into during this time. During the medieval era, greatest philosophers such as Augustine and Aquinas also had very significant contentions of the self. But you have to understand that before comprehending these ideas from Aquinas and Augustine on the self, you have to look for the background of the medieval period. Kasi bakit ito nasabi ni Augustine, bakit ito nasabi ni Aquinas, no? So basically, just to give us a short background of the medieval period, the medieval era was the time that the Catholic Church came into power. This is the time that the Catholic Church controlled the social life, even the political life of the people during their time. So that is why the people were so much influenced by the teachings of religion, particularly Catholicism. So that is why the idea of Aquinas and Augustine were influenced by the teachings of Christianity, particularly the teachings of Catholicism. So no wonder na later on we can understand that Augustine thought of the self as composed of body and spirit, which is the spirit that we believe in. Christianity is the soul, that after our body will die, then we'll go to heaven. Our soul or spirit will go to heaven. And the same idea also that is coming from Aquinas, that man is composed of the body and the spirit. So this is actually because these philosophers are influenced by the teachings of Christianity during their times. However, there's one more thing that you have to understand, and this is the connection of the thought between the medieval thinkers and the ancient or Socratic philosophers. Why? Because actually, yung teachings ni Saint Augustine was coming from the teachings of Plato. In other words, Augustine adopted the philosophy of Plato, and likewise, Aquinas also adopted the teachings of Aristotle. That is why we can see later on that their contentions have actually connected to the Greek thoughts. No? Kaya historical kasi yan. When the Catholic Church preserved the archives and the teachings of the Greek philosophers during this time. So it was studied by the medieval theologians such as Augustine and of course Aquinas. Okay? Therefore, since God was the center of the philosophical discussions during the medieval period, then the idea of the self is also related. It becomes related to religion, and it's really related to the teachings of Christianity during this time. However, during the time of the modern era, when there was a period of Renaissance, then afterwards here comes the period of Enlightenment, in which science came into humanity. I'm talking about modern science, I'm talking about experimental sciences. So when the experimental sciences came to humanity, there was a paradigm shift of discussion about the self. Now, instead of focusing on the self in relation to God, no, the focus right now was centered on the self itself. No? So, what happened? Anong nangyari? Bakit nagbago yung quests? No, we are still talking about the quest of the self. Bakit nagbago ang search or quests of the self during the modern times? So, the change of the quests about the self was basically because of René Descartes. You know, René Descartes, a mathematician and a philosopher. He was considered as the father of modern philosophy. No? So he is also the author of the Cartesian plane. You're familiar with that, especially the mathematicians out there. So Descartes was actually confused because of the diversity of truths during his time. Kasi syempre, religion, especially the church, hold a particular truth which is based on the Bible, based on the scriptures. On the other hand, science holds also a particular truth which is based on experiments. So there was now a cacophony of truths. Cacophony means ang daming diversion of truths. So Descartes was now confused. Saan na ba yung katotohanan? Alin na ba yung katotohanan dito? Yung sinasabi ba ng religion o yung sinasabi ng siyensya? So which is now the truth? To search for the certitude or the foundation of truth, Descartes doubted everything, including himself. So he put everything into question because he was searching for the truth. However, since Descartes could not find the truth outside of himself, he went back to himself, inside, and doubted his own existence, whether he exists or not. So he doubted his body, whether he exists or not. So when Descartes went back to himself, he realized one thing, and that is, he cannot doubt that he is doubting. So Descartes actually concluded that I cannot doubt that I am doubting. So in the diversity of truths in the world, there's one thing that I cannot doubt, and that is, I am doubting. Therefore, by concluding that he himself is the indubitable truth, Descartes have found out that the certitude or the foundation of truth is not outside of the self, but it is within or inside of man, and that is the thinking self. So Descartes had this famous dictum, cogito ergo sum, which is a Latinized version, but some thinkers translate it as I think, therefore I am, or I think, therefore I exist. So Descartes concluded that the foundation of truth is not religion, neither science, but it is the self itself. But there is one important note that we have to understand in this contention, because specifically Descartes also concluded that the self is a cogito, a thinking being, and that the body is just a mere extension of the mind. So for Descartes, the one that is in existence is not actually the body, but only the mind. So the body is just like a machine that is simply attached to the mind, and the body will not work if the mind is not thinking. No? So that's why it's the mind and body. And also Descartes separated the mind and the body ideas from the Socratic philosophers. So but for Descartes, the body is somehow useless, attached lang yan sa mind, and the most important thing is the mind, not the body. That is why modernity was called anthropocentric period. In other words, modernity was called by philosophers as the period of man. This is the period of the self, in which the self is now the center of the philosophical discussions. So this is now different now, okay? Because in the ancient times, the center of the philosophical thought was the cosmos or the world. Kasi yung ancient time was cosmocentric period, in which most philosophers were talking about the cosmos, how the world was made, what was the ultimate beginning of the world. And the medieval times was the period of God, in which God was the center of the philosophical thought. But the modern times was different because of Descartes. The focus now on the discussions is centered on the self or the human person. So the human person right now in the modern period was like a modern God. The man is now the holder of truth and the bearer of truth. So this is now a different idea in which man is trying to arise as the center of the philosophical discussions. However, the modernity's idea of the self, especially the body as just mere extension of the mind, became very problematic. Why? Because it was in this idea that the body of the human person was degraded, depersonalized, and dehumanized. The human life was considered as a thing, isang bagay, sa kabutang, thing, an object of pleasures, object of experiments, and it's just an object. The greatest manifestation of how modern people treated human life as an object was during the World War I and the World War II. If you have studied it in history, you may know that the World War I and the World War II had cost millions of lives and the destructions of billions and trillions of properties. So the wars had actually brought tremendous traumas and destruction of the human life and society in general. So the question right now is that where is the value of life? Where is the value of our human existence? Can we still find the meaning of ourselves in spite of the problems that we have encountered as products of the modern life? Can we still find the meaning and the authentic meaning of ourselves in spite of the complications and the problems that our society had given to us? Can we still live a meaningful life as a self? As a response to the problems given by modern life to humanity, the contemporary philosophers had continued the quests about the self, but the quest right now is on the quest of meaning, the quest of the value of the self, especially the times that the self is encountering a lot of problems and troubles in this life. That is why in the next discussions that we are going to have, we shall be talking about the idea of the contemporary philosophers of the self. Kasi ang dami nila like Kierkegaard, Marcel, Buber, Heidegger, and many other philosophers in the contemporary times from 19th century up to the 21st century. With the coming of psychology in the 19th century and also with the coming of sociology, then the contemporary philosophers have these beautiful quests of the self. Now, the psychologists have specified their quest about the self, especially on studying the human mind and the human behavior, and the sociology also specified their quest about the self, especially the connection of the self's development with his family, society, and culture. So these are important topics, important contentions of the self, which we are going to discuss later on. But in general, the quest of the self is still going. No? Kasi as we continue our lives, we all have that quest in ourselves. So, I have just presented to you the quests of the philosophers, and of course with the aid of psychology and sociology in the contemporary and the modern times. This is the enduring quest of the self. Enduring kasi it began in the ancient time, and up to now, until now, people are still searching to answer the question of who am I. People are still seeking for the answer of who and what we really are. So various thinkers around the world may differ in their points of view, but their ideas are so valuable in understanding ourselves and our identity. From past up to the present, I have just presented to you the enduring quest of the self. Now, I have just presented to you that the quest of the self is continuous. That's why it's enduring. Now, at present, even our adolescents today have this question in themselves. Who am I? Who really am I? Our quests of the self is continuous. Why? Because whether we like it or not, we live with the world and time. We live in this continuous world and continuous time. That is why we can never deny the reality that ourselves is also changing in the world and in time. We change because ourselves is in the world full of possibilities. Ourselves is with time, and time is passing, time is changing. As rational beings, we have these common questions within ourselves as to who we really are and why are we here in this world. What is really the purpose of ourselves? We have this common question that we keep on searching for in this life. Common questions such as, am I living a worthy life? Am I really happy in this life? Can I find myself and the authentic value and meaning of my real self? Can myself still find the real happiness, satisfaction, and fulfillment in this life? What will happen to me in the next chapters of my life? Will I achieve my dreams and goals? Will I become a professional person someday? Or I will just die at my very young age? So these are questions that we usually throw to ourselves. And I know that these questions are all related to our search and quest about our very own selves, as we continue our journey in this life. So, this is me, Sir John Michael Antone, and I am telling you, as long as you are alive, as long as you exist in this world and time, as long as you are breathing, then your journey is still going on. Your life is still moving forward. And of course, your quest about yourself will always be there in your mind and in your hearts. Live a fantastic, wonderful, and amazing life. God bless you.